Hello and welcome to another episode of Movies That Make Us. I'm Jake.
I'm Tracy. And we can't hear Val.
We can't hear you, Val. Oh no.
Technical difficulties.
Nope.
Nothing yet. I can hear Jake fine.
Uh-oh. Let's see. It looks like you're on. Well, I think she was just on mute. Anyway. She'll pop back in. Tracy, how are you doing? How are things going?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to talk about the Batman tonight. Probably my favorite superhero.
And I'm Val.
There we go.
It happened the other day on Multiplane Podcast when we had three people, like Brian Young was on there and we couldn't hear him. And so he went back and then came back in. It's kind of like turning it off and then turning it back on. I don't know.
It's the old IT staple. Turning it off, back on again.
Yeah.
So we are live. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, whoever is out there watching. We appreciate it. We're excited to do this. We wanted to do a special episode. Before we get into it at all, I want to warn anyone and everyone who has not seen The Batman that we will be getting into spoilers. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, then you're going to want to come back and watch this later. It will be available on our Facebook page. It will be available on our YouTube channel. So you're welcome to come back and watch it later. Or listen to it later, whatever you want to do. But if you don't want spoilers, you definitely don't want to listen live because we will spoil it for you. So there's our obligatory spoiler warning.
Well done, sir.
Thank you. Anyway, but we are talking about the Batman. You guys have seen it. Tracy, you were saying this is your favorite superhero.
Yeah, I've always been a Batman guy. I know you're a big Supes guy.
I am.
It took me until I was older to really appreciate Superman.
Yeah.
But Batman, the Tim Burton Batman was the first like superhero film when I was like growing up. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it was just, we get so many comic book movies now, but we didn't back then. And so it was such a huge deal. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Bats, so I'm excited to talk about it tonight.
Yeah. And Tim Burton's Batman, I feel like, was one of the first movies that really kind of took comic book material seriously. I mean, the Superman movies, the first one, it was really just the origin story of Superman. The second one was definitely a little bit campy, and the third and fourth were just over the top campy. But Batman was really kind of the first one that was like, hey, what if we took these stories seriously? And now we come here, 33 years later, and we get Matt Reeves The Batman, which takes it to a whole new level.
Well, and did they like really take it that seriously? Like with Michael Keaton, I mean, I feel like it was still comic book material, but it was dark, more story-based comic book material, like more like the comic books. Whereas I feel like the television shows, which I really enjoyed, the Batman television show. I remember being super little and watching it on TV on my belly, just like sitting there, at night watching the show and loving it. And then just like Tracy, when we got Michael Keaton as Batman, I felt like, okay, should I be watching this? Like for one, because I was really little. And then two, I was just like, what is this that I'm watching? Because like I had read comic books, but not in a serious way. Like my family wasn't big into comic books. So it was like, oh, you want one of those? Okay.
Same.
And then I'd read it. It wasn't like, look at how cool this is, like I am. I wasn't getting it forced on me like I do to my kid. But and then, when we went to the Val Kilmer and the George Clooney movies, they got even more campy. So I feel like Hollywood was almost afraid to take these too seriously,
Yeah.
even though it worked the first time with Michael Keaton, right? Like they wanted to make him very cartoony. And then we got
Right.
Nolan's Batman,
Mhm.
which to me, and you can send me the hate mail. I love the movies, but to me, they're less of Batman movies and more of these drama action
Yeah.
movies, right? Like Batman
Mhm.
is in it and the characters are there, but to me, it doesn't feel like a Batman movie. There are parts, right? But they're just really
Mhm.
good, like drama, action, suspense movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The Dark Knight and then Dark Knight Rises very much kind of espionage 007 type movie that just happens to have Batman. And that's one of the things that I loved about Matt Reeves' take on it is, to me, this is the most fully realized version of Batman that we've gotten on screen yet. This is a character who's incredibly smart. So often he's just dismissed as being rich, and he's incredibly smart. He's incredibly talented. He's got so many different versatile skills, and we finally get to see him be a detective, which was really, really satisfying to me.
I mean, I love a good detective movie and I love film noir, but I do wanna, like, what was this house he was living in? Like, where are the vampires? Where like, it was awesome. Like, this is a house, like, I was sketching as a teenager in my dark, like, I love vampires, not like the sparkly ones, but like the really dark ones, and
Right.
you're drawing all these, like,
Uh-huh.
old cathedral like, he was living in an old cathedral. Where is this
Yes.
in Gotham/New York/Gotham, right?
Yeah.
Where is
It's
it?
it's usually it's usually on the outskirts.
But it didn't seem like it was too
No.
outskirtish. It
Well,
felt like it was, like, just next door. You live next to this spooky old man.
it was interesting because it seemed like it was even in, like, one of the buildings in Gotham. Because at one point
Yeah.
when the bomb see, here we go with spoilers. So, again, really seriously, if you haven't seen it and you don't want it spoiled, please do not listen past this point. But when the package comes that's for him, that's the explosion, right?
Right.
And he looks up to see it's like smoke coming from one of the buildings, it seemed like.
Yeah, it was in the middle of the city.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, I kinda thought the same thing at first when we're seeing the inside of Wayne Manor, where like, it seemed
Like,
like
I
it
just
was just left there, nobody had really touched it, it wasn't lived in,
Yeah.
it was just this
Yeah.
kind of almost museum, and at first I was like, "This is really weird and bizarre," but one of the things that people often talk about with Batman is when he's got the mask and the cowl on, that's his real face, and Bruce Wayne is really
Right.
the mask.
Right.
And I think that this was kind of a way to represent that because
Mhm.
he wasn't living in that house like Alfred was, still hanging out, trying to pay the bills and whatever, but, like, he
I get
wasn't living as Bruce Wayne. He was really
he lives in the
Batman
back.
had kind of the Batman had kind of become who he is 100%, and
Yeah.
then Bruce Wayne was kind of just there, and I think that kind of was representative in the building, but I agree, Val, it may have been a bit much.
I mean, it
The
was super cool, but when he first walks in, I'm like, "Where are we? Like, what far off oh, we're not, like, anywhere far off. We're right here, and this is the house that his parents thought, 'You know what we should do? We should live here and raise a kid, and he's
Yeah.
gonna end up normal.'" No. So, for me, it makes
So you're saying he
sense.
was good from the beginning.
Yeah, like, for me, it makes sense that his family was so eccentric, right? I don't think we really ever get that in the past
No.
Batman movies. We just get that they're rich and they're philanthropist kind of,
Mhm.
and they maybe wanted to make Gotham better, but we never really saw in those movies how they were doing that. Like, they had a big company, and sometimes they'd give money, and sometimes they were on the news. But, like, here, you really get to see that they were they had a lot of money, and yes, they had that facade of giving back and wanting Gotham to be better, but they were odd. They were
Oh,
really
yeah.
odd, and so it makes more sense that he is that odd, right?
Mhm.
So to me,
Well,
even though that brought me out of the moment for a second, as the movie went on, it made much more sense that that's the world they were creating for him.
yeah. And I love the fact that we do not have an origin story for
Oh, thank
Batman. We don't have
goodness.
to see Martha and Thomas die. I love
Martha!
why did you say that name? But I love the idea of Martha Wayne being an Arkham, which I had never thought of before.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
such a cool thing to do. And by the way, they're doing a spin-off. Originally, it was going to be about the Gotham Police Department, but they've switched it up and it's going to be about Arkham Asylum.
Mm.
So we're going to get an inside look into Arkham as well as a TV show with the Penguin. So we're going to see the Penguin's rise to power. We're going to see the inside of Arkham, and there's so many villains that they can bring out. That Batman has the best villain
Yeah, he does. And
ever.
The villains in this
And
movie were, like, amazing, because that was the one thing about, like, the Nolan series that, like, the Sandman and Arkham, like, the Scarecrow, sorry, and
yeah, the
Arkham,
Scarecrow. Yeah.
sorry, Scarecrow and Arkham, I really wanted that to be more than it was, and I feel like it was just kinda
Mhm.
like, "We're gonna touch it. We're gonna kinda poke at it a little bit," but then, like, it doesn't really
We're
go
not going to
anywhere.
fully embrace
Yeah,
it.
it doesn't really, like, they kinda teased us with, "We're gonna give you, like, the underbelly and really let you see," but then it was
Right.
just it was whatever.
Yeah. Well, with the parents, what I thought was interesting in the Batman mythos, so often Thomas Wayne is almost untouchable, almost an Uncle
Yes.
Ben type character.
Mhm.
Like he is just, I mean, like walks
Mhm.
on water, untouchable.
Right. Right.
Um, and this gives us a different look at his character where he kind of has that fall from grace when he makes a decision for good reasons, right? He wants to protect his wife and her reputation and doesn't want her name dragged through the mud. But then he gets in bed, so to say, with Carmine Falcone, and that is what kind of that's his fall from grace, and he realizes he's taken it too far. And once that toothpaste is out, you can't put it back in the tube.
Right.
Hey, I'm just throwing them all out there. Getting into bed, toothpaste coming out of tubes, whatever.
But I really loved that his fall from
Well, can we
grace was
let's talk
because
a
of the
little
love
bit.
for his wife.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Like, just like in Star Wars, you're gonna do whatever you're gonna do for the person that you love, even if it ends up killing them in the end.
Yep. What were you gonna say, Tracy?
I was just going to say, can we talk about how beautifully cast this movie was? You've got Robert Pattinson, which a lot of people did not think would be a good Batman, who's done really good work. If you've been paying attention to his filmography, I thought he
Mhm.
was a fantastic Batman, especially this version of him. Paul Dano, I love the fact that we did not see his face through most of this movie. It was behind that army hoodie gas mask thing, because when you finally find out who the Riddler is and you finally see him, Paul Dano looks like he's like 16. And the guy just looks young. And here you have kind of this young, almost cherub like face that is hiding this awful evil underneath him. And I love that juxtaposition, and the stuff that he did with his voice was just fantastic. When they're having the interrogation scene at Arkham and he's going, Bruce, it was just like,
Yeah. Well, and Batman's terrified that he knows the secret, but
right.
and he ends up not. But it's funny you mentioned the cherub, like the youth looking face. I was at the store shortly after seeing the movie, like the next day or something, and there was a kid that looked just like Paul Dano as the Riddler,
Really,
like even clear glasses, framed glasses and everything. I'm like, that poor kid's psychopath, obviously. Obviously. So I steered clear and I called the
Yeah,
police. I
well,
felt like it was the responsible thing to do.
See,
So
I don't think Paul Dano looks like a sweet little cherub at all. I made
no,
sure, like I've been trying to, is the only people that I really knew were gonna be in this movie, were Zoe, um, Twilight Boy, and Andy Serkis.
mhm,
okay,
So I tried to steer clear of a lot of things. And so Paul Dano is one of those actors that when you see specific pieces of him, you get excited because you know it's him, right? And
mhm,
so I was guessing, I was like, oh, wait a second. And I love that feeling in the movie. That's why I try to like keep it a little bit of a secret because when you see so many movies, you have to have something like to look forward to, right? And so
right,
I'm watching
right.
and I'm like, oh, I think that's Paul Dano. And then it ends up being him. And I love how, yeah, they took so long to reveal him. But to me, and I
Mhm.
love you, Paul. I love you, Paul Dano. But you look like a serial killer. You have always looked like a serial killer. This part for you is fantastic. I love it. And the fact that there are two of you, even better.
yeah, he was good. And I loved at the end where he kind of reveals to Batman that like they were working together the whole time in his
Right,
mind, right? That
Yeah.
he was part of the
mhm,
plan, that he left those clues not
and
because he wanted Batman to help him. They were exposing all of the ugliness in Gotham
they were
City.
a team.
Yeah. And when he finds out, Batman's like, "No, sorry, you crossed a line that I'm not going to cross." It was really cool. It was a cool
I
moment.
I I thought it was great. I loved the riddles. There was some really dark humor in that, the thumb drive. I
Yes.
laughed
Oh
out
my
loud and I'm like,
gosh.
"I should not laugh at
But it
this."
was meant to be funny.
But
Like,
it was,
it was
yeah,
funny.
yeah. But the L the URL, I thought
Yeah.
that was really well done. I didn't put that together until they started typing it into a web browser. I'm like, "Oh, of course, of course,
Yeah.
of course." And
The
see, I took basic Spanish back in college because I had to. So I knew that it was supposed to be la rata, ratata, or
Yeah.
whatever it was, but I didn't think L. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, okay, well done."
Yeah. It
See, and
was
It
good.
was just a smart
I'm just
script.
stupid because they call that out in the movie. And like 'cause Alfred says he's got really bad Spanish because it's not L, it's law. And like I just don't even think about it until the Penguin says it again. And then they're like, oh, that is wrong. Let's see if we can figure it out. Like I was like, oh yeah, he must just not speak Spanish very well. I just kept going.
I did the
Obviously, that was
same.
part of the clue. And I just kept
I
going. I just
Same.
yeah. So I
Well, and
obviously I'm dumb, but
I loved when they pulled back the carpet and he was like the
Yeah.
Zodiac killer. Like
mhm.
if
Mhm.
you know anything about like the Zodiac killer and all of these creepy things that he did, I've seen like pretty much every movie and documentary made about him. Not cuz like not in a weird way, just I don't know why. But I really loved that, how they made him so smart, but also, I mean, he's psychotic, like
Mhm.
Right.
clinically
Mhm.
psychotic.
Mhm.
Um, and to me, that was like, this is really an investigative story. It's not the cheesy like Riddler and I'm just crazy for no reason. Like that's I
Jim Carrey
loved
was a
yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place for that, but what I loved about this movie is almost every character that we've been told in cinema for the past however 60, 70 years, however long we've had the Riddler and Batman and on a screen, we're just
mhm.
supposed to and Catwoman and Penguin, like we're just supposed to believe that they are bad because they're crazy, right?
Mhm.
Right.
And the
Right.
villains in this movie, including who's going to be Catwoman's,
Mhm.
she's not this like psychotic woman who just like gets her feelings hurt by a man or society and then decides to like go against the world. Like to me, I'm not putting down like Michelle Pfeiffer. I love it, But when you
Sure.
look at most DC female villains on the big screen up till now, they are villains because some psychotic break happened because somebody wasn't paying attention to me, and so
You're
now I'm gonna
absolutely
kill
right.
all of you.
Yeah.
And
You are
this
100% right.
Catwoman is my favorite Catwoman.
Yeah,
I
this
agree.
this Catwoman is much more in line with what we see in the modern comics today with Catwoman, and why she is because in the comics, Catwoman and Batman do have a relationship. I think they're even married right now. I don't know. I
I
mean,
think so, yeah.
it's worse than soap operas trying to keep up with all of the relationships and everything. But the thing is, that's what makes her an equal to Batman, and so often you don't see the strength, you don't see the character that is
Mhm.
Catwoman, like you said, Val. You know, this isn't someone who fell out of window and got licked by a bunch of cats, and so now she's crazy and sewing a cat suit together. Like Michelle Pfeiffer was amazing in Batman Returns,
Yeah,
but I think in the 90s, what our comic book supervillains were very
Yeah.
different than what they are now. When you read a Batman comic now, it feels much more like Matt Reeves the Batman
Mhm.
than it does Batman or Batman Returns or uh, they never felt like Batman Forever or Batman and Robin. But
Right.
like the comics now, you know, you've got Penguin who's leading a crime family. You've got Catwoman who is in this gray area instead of a villain.
An
She's
anti-hero.
yeah, and you've got Riddler who's off his rocker, and you've got more of these kinds of villains, and we see that in the Matt Reeves world, and what I really love one of the big mistakes that they've made in superhero films in the past is they're like, "We wanna pack in more of these villains,"
Right.
and they never do it very well, but this was just right because it was Batman's living in the city where these villains just exist all the time.
Mhm.
And so when they're interacting, their stories might intertwine, but they're not necessarily I don't know, in the past, they're, like, working together or there's some kind of plot or whatever, but
Well,
in this, they're not necessarily, they're just all he's just got a bunch of crap going on at the same time.
well, and
right.
it's the
And
one thing that I love about Daredevil, and I will say it, Luke Cage, because I've been rewatching these, is that when you're in Hell's Kitchen, you know that you're all there and you all exist. And like you said, the stories intertwine with each other, but they're not like meeting up for,
Yeah,
coffee.
right.
But like villains and superheroes and anti-heroes and all these people, you are in this small area, and so you do cross paths, and so it makes a lot of sense that they're connected and they're not all just knowing each other because they want to kill Batman.
yeah.
Right. And the thing that I really like, Jake, is that we have a Batman who's not been paying attention to the city. He
Mhm.
is not focused on. He is a wounded animal in this movie. He is pure rage. He is anger. He is hurt, and he just wants to beat the crap out of people. And he picks bad guys to do it because then they can feel like it's justified. So he's
Yeah.
not paying attention to people like the Riddler. And the thing that I love too is that Matt Reeves develops this character, and we find out at the end that he is like basically starting a little online fan club, and that
Yeah.
people are following him and listening to him and being radicalized by him. And I was like, I know they did this before the January 6th insurrection. I know they made this along, but holy crap, did that just hit like a hammer when that section came up, because now you've got a Batman. By the end of the film, you've got a Batman who's starting to become the hero that we know and that we love. He is a
Mhm.
character. He says several times, I have to have hope. I can't just be vengeance. There has to be hope. I have to be a better person. And that's going to lead us into him becoming Bruce Wayne
Yes.
versus him becoming the Batman.
Yeah, we get very little Bruce Wayne in this,
Mhm.
and that's been one of the criticisms that I've seen, but I also think that that's on purpose because of what you just said, Tracy. I think in what we're going to see from Bruce Wayne is that is how he's going to bring hope back to the city because now he's
Mhm.
realized he's gotta do more than just beat up the bad guys because at the beginning, he's talking about, "I don't even know if I'm making a difference." Well,
Right.
you're kinda
Right.
not. I
Yeah,
mean,
because
you're
he
fighting a
doesn't exist during the day. He's just
yeah.
out at night
Mhm.
and not paying attention, and as soon as the Riddler says he's vengeance, like, he says it the same way,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Batman's like, Well, crap.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you've been telling me this whole time that we're the same, and I'm like, we're not the same, but you kind of are the same.
You kind of
And
are.
there's a very gray line between what Batman was doing and this, and I love how they made it seem like they work together, because I do feel like most villains that are the opposite, like you've got the good and the bad. I feel like most villains feel like they are working with the hero because they wouldn't exist without him. And so we've kind of, it's been touched a little bit here and there. Like I really think like Michael Keaton's Batman, and then we have the Joker, Jack Nicholson's Joker, kind of was like that. They were kind of the yin and the yang to each other, and but it wasn't like this. And I was like, yeah, like Batman, there's always that story, like if you're a hero long enough, you become the villain. But what if you didn't realize you were kind of the villain the whole time because you're emo and sad and trying to just get through the day? Like most of us are out there just trying to do what we can to get through the day. He just happens to have armor and live in the Vatican. I don't know.
Yeah. It was when you bring up his fan club that he had online, though, the followers that Riddler had online, there was one part in there that I felt like they kind of missed the mark, because the cop like looks at it and he's like, yeah, he's got like 500 followers. Like he was astounded that that was that many. Let me tell you, this day and age, on if this guy was on TikTok or YouTube, he'd have thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of followers. I mean, maybe tens of thousands, but he'd have a lot more than just 500.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
It really, really is. So the thing that I really like too, and going back to Jake, you talked about how these characters just exist. Spoiler, the scene at the end, the inmate that's talking to the Riddler has been confirmed by Matt Reeves as the Joker. But that does not
thank goodness. I was not sure.
but that does not mean that we're getting the Joker in the next movie, which I'm very excited about, because he's
he's in Arkham. Like he doesn't mean he's getting out anytime soon.
And there was a scene that was cut where Batman actually talks to the Joker, because he wants to get into the mind. It's almost like a Silence of the Lambs. He wants to get inside the mind of a serial killer. And so he's talking to him about Riddler, but it got cut. So I can't wait to see that scene. But I like the fact that we're not necessarily going to be stuck with a Joker in the sequel. And it's just, there's just bad stuff in that city, and Batman has to step up his game, because it's not going to be easily solved.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I really like, is there's bad stuff in that city. And we talked about there's not the origin story, but what I really like is we're just stepping in. Like he's just a couple of years into being Batman. He's obviously already faced off against the Joker because he's already in Arkham, but we don't get that backstory and we don't need it. We're just stepping in. This is the moment in time. This is when the story's being told. And they did a really good job of making the world feel lived in and feel like we are just stepping in and everything's great. Not great, but everything works and it all works together. And like, it didn't feel out of place to have the Joker show up there, because it was like, yeah, obviously he's put villains in Arkham before. They know, because when you've got crazy stuff going on, like the Riddler with the riddles and everything else, they already know, let's call in the Batman to have him come take a look. And like,
It may not trust him.
It was a nice touch.
But Gordon's allowing it. Yeah. Well, I love the fact too that we kind of got a version of the Long Halloween, Jake, which is one of the best Batman comics ever written. If you haven't read that story, check it out. But we get a lot of the Long Halloween. We also get is it 0 Year? I think.
Or Year One.
One of the two, yeah.
Yeah.
But I like that Matt Reeves, and that was what was so exciting for me watching this movie, because I went in kind of lowered expectations. Like, I'm a Batman fan, but I'm not a fanboy. Like, I hated Batman v Superman. That was an awful movie, and I was really ticked off after watching that movie.
That doesn't make you less of a fan. That just makes you someone with taste.
But I love that Matt Reeves picked and chose different things from all these different iterations of Batman. There were times where I'm like, this is straight out of the comics. There were other times where I'm like, this is straight out of the Arkham Asylum video games, which are amazingly fun to play. Like some of the Catwoman fighting moves, I'm like, that's straight out of the Arkham games. And so to see him take all these little pieces and weave it together into this tapestry was just really, really exciting for me.
Well, you've got 80 plus years of material to draw from. And we talked about there not being an origin story. Like, thank goodness, because we've got 80 plus years. We don't need to see the origin story again. We know it. And
Right.
I love the idea of saying, okay, I'm going to take some of these bits and pieces from these different things, because it did feel like to me, Batman Year One, the Frank Miller graphic novel that is so well done and so well written, and the art is beautiful. So it felt like that, and Long Halloween, but it wasn't like they weren't trying to say, here's the Long Halloween in movie form. We're going to take it so it feels like that, and you get the detective feel. And I think that was great. I think it was really, really well done, to be honest, in a lot of ways. And we don't see a lot of the detective Batman like we've talked about, and we do get to see that a lot in this one.
We got little bits of it in the Nolan films, like when he's reconstructing the bullet. There's a few things, but it never felt like he was really a detective, and this one did.
So one of the things that I'm not a big Batman fan. I mean, I'm familiar with his stuff because I think if you're a comic book fan or a DC fan, you have to be somewhat familiar with Batman on some level. And he's just a major player in DC. That's the way it is. But one of the things that's really always intriguing about Batman is he doesn't have superpowers, right? Even his intelligence, it's because of years of studying and hard work and his fighting ability and all of that. And what we saw in this was a Batman who actually looked mortal. He looked like a normal guy going out and fighting. And even in his detective work, like there was stuff that he missed. It wasn't like when we got the detective stuff with Christopher Nolan's Batman, it was almost like the superhuman level of like, I am smarter than every other person out there. And this, a couple years into it, it felt like somebody who was just a couple years into being Batman, who was kind of learning the ropes, and he made mistakes. Like he missed some of the clues because he didn't catch the bombs that were going to be going off, and so they couldn't prevent that. And you saw him in a couple of the fights where he took some pretty nasty shots because he's just figuring this stuff out, and he's not immortal, he's not super powered. And I don't know, I really appreciated that representation of Batman as well.
I like when the car backfired. Like, this is going to be a really, really cool moment. And then it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. I was like, I actually like that a lot. That it's like, yeah, vroom, 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 like every other Batman, and then
yeah.
Wait, hold on, one more try. Okay, let's go.
Just a second.
Yeah, the fire shooting out the back, everything, and then nope.
I saw this in IMAX, and I loved the sound that car made. I'm not a big car guy, but there was something about that engine with Penguin that I was like, that's bad.
Yeah. So we saw it in a theater that had D-box seats, and we weren't in the D-box seats, and those are the ones that kind of vibrate and move with the action. We were a
the
row.
Stupidest name for a chair ever.
I know.
Who wants to buy a D-box ticket?
Like, I feel like I'm saying something just almost naughty when I say D-box because
D-bag and
exactly. I think of Justin Timberlake and Andy Samberg and their Saturday Night Live Christmas video.
Oh, great. Now that's what I'm going to think of.
I'm sorry. That's what I think of. But we sat in the row in front of those seats. So when they vibrated, we could still feel it. And it was just the right amount, like during the car chase scene of vibration and stuff like that, where you felt like, okay, I'm like in the action and stuff. So that wasn't bad. I've sat in the actual seats before, and it's not an enjoyable movie going experience for me. Some people may really like it, but it just wasn't what I liked. So
yeah.
But so that scene though brings up something that I think is interesting about this movie. To me, and this is going to sound really weird coming from me, so I'm sorry, but I felt like for the first half of the movie, we got that really edgy, right up to like as PG-13 as they could make it, almost R. And then the second half of the movie, I felt like a lot of the punches were pulled. and it didn't feel as much like that. Like a lot of that edginess, a lot of that grittiness was gone. Almost like the studio came in and said, "Look, we're getting too close. We got to pull this back." I mean, and the reason why I bring up the car chase scene is that's a good example. At the beginning of the movie, you've got Penguin comes out and he says, I mean, he just dropped that's the F bomb that they get in the PG-13 movie.
Right.
And then when he's getting chased by the Batman, he says, "Who is this friggin' guy?" or something like that. And he says friggin' instead of, and I'm like, okay, that just seemed out of character compared to what we saw at the beginning. And I feel like that's kind of how the movie went. Like we had the severed thumb, we had stuff written in blood, we had these really intense moments. And then the second half of the movie, a lot of that wasn't there. And it felt a little bit weird to me.
I don't know, for me, I felt like because they were making it more emotional, an
Hmm.
emotional connection in the second half, that
Yeah.
if you start throwing in specific language during that, it's not as bleak because now you're taken out by language, you know what I mean? And so like their entire world is flooding. Like,
Right.
there's no way there's thousands of people dying. Like, if you sit back and just think about, like, yeah, he saved, like, 10 people that were right there, but, like, the rest of the city, dead.
Yeah.
Friggin' dead, right?
Right.
So, like, for me, I didn't like, that didn't, like, do it like, it wasn't awful for me because I felt like there was so many other really horrible things going on, and to me, I feel like Penguin would say friggin' more than he would say the
And
F word, and so for me, like, I
well, and
it just fit.
it wasn't just about the language for me, and
Yeah.
that was just an example. I just felt
Mhm.
like at the beginning, it was this edge of your seat, intense, like scenes that were almost traumatizing. Like there were people in there with their little kids when we were there, and I thought this
Ooh,
is not the right movie to be here with your little kids. Like,
uh-uh.
I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to raise your kids, but it just seemed like
Do some
anyway.
research beforehand. Yeah.
But the second half of the movie, I'm like, but this isn't any worse than like, the second half of the movie I felt like wasn't any worse than anything we've seen in Marvel or any other DC movie, but the first half definitely felt different. I don't know, I just felt like the tone changed a lot in the
I
second
think
part.
the tone in Batman changed a lot by the second
Yes.
part of the movie, and
Yes.
so for me, it fit, and I do
Mhm.
wanna go back to, like, your kids. I am not your research. I've had at least 7 people message me, "Would it be okay for my kids to see this movie?" I don't know, like, what do they watch regularly? I
Yeah,
know 7-year-olds that watch horror movies. I don't watch horror movies, like, so, like, for me, it is the same rating as Spider-Man.
Mhm.
It's not as violent as Spider-Man, which is funny because Spider-Man's actually more violent, but in a more upbeat kinda way
Uh-huh.
sometimes,
Uh-huh.
whereas this has very, very dark storylines that are more
Yes.
adult, but being less violent, but when it is violent, it's gross. So, like, I don't know what your kids can watch, that's up to you.
Right.
yeah, my
Well,
recommendation on that is I think you go see it first and then decide. Like, if
mhm.
you're on the fence and if you're not on the fence about it and you're like, "No, my kid can handle it, I don't care," then whatever, you're the parent, you decide what you can do with your kids. But if you're on the fence about it, then go see it first and then decide, "Can my kid handle this or not?" I took my oldest, he's 15, I didn't feel like it would be a problem. I'm glad I didn't take number 3 because I don't think he would
Yeah.
have enjoyed it as much.
No, absolutely. And the thing too, I think, Jake, because as the Riddler got a little more sadistic as we got closer to the heart of the mystery, we cut away from what could have been the most macabre moment
Yes, we did.
where the guy basically was killed by rat poison and
Yeah.
his face was eaten by rats. And they
It was
mentioned
very
that just
Saw.
quickly, very much, very Saw, which fits in with some of the going to the Arkham video games. The Riddler in that one makes these death traps that you as
Mhm.
Batman have to survive. Um, and it's very Saw-like in parts. Can I get super nerdy here for a second?
No. Yes,
Of
that's what we're
course.
doing.
How would that be any different than how I normally am, right? Okay, but the thing that was so cool about this movie to me, the cinematography was
Mhm.
fantastic. And one of the things that they did is they used anamorphic lenses. And I won't get into all the gory, all the boring details, but basically anamorphic lenses distort the image. It was a way to make things look like they were widescreen without being widescreen before we had widescreen. And Matt Reeves purposely, along with the cinematographer, I think he did Dune as well. So bravo to that guy for quite the year. But they purposely sought out odd focal lengths and odd lenses. And so typically you'd have like an 80 to 85 millimeter lens, which is approximately is about what the eye would see. And he went out and asked for 88. And they're like, why do you want that? You don't want that. And he's like, no, I want that. And one of the things that it did is, and they did this as well, as it was shot digitally, but with real glass lenses, real old school cinema lenses. And then they took that print, they developed it onto film, and then they bleached that film and put that back into the computer to make it so that it's even more dirty and grungy. And that's how this Batman and this Gotham is. But later in the film, we start to get, as we get more hope and we start to get a little bit better, we get the scenes with Catwoman when they're watching the sunrise. We get a little more light. We get a little bit more. Val, we had talked briefly before. You kind of felt like the cinematography was a little muddy.
I just felt like, and I didn't say this was a bad thing, but when you leave the movie, you very much feel like half of it, like you said, is kind of like dishwater. Like it's very like there's no hope. It's super sad. But then you like when you get towards the end of the movie, even though people are dying in a flood, now things are more blue. Like if you know, like the brighter blue colors and not this muddy like dishwater the whole time. Except for when you're in the underground club where everything's like cool and hot.
The other
and
thing
creepy.
The other thing that these lenses do, which I thought was so cool, is it really limits your depth of field. It makes a very shallow depth of field. And this is a movie called The Batman, and the Batman is in almost every scene in this film. And so we're seeing this through his eyes. We have him as the anchor point. It's very Hitchcockian in that sense.
That's not a real
and the
word.
thing that I love.
Oh, it is now. We made it up.
It is Hitchcockian. Oh yeah, it's there.
That's a dirty word.
Trademark movies that make us.
The scene that I loved, the scene that I thought was so cool, was when Batman is fleeing from the detectives, from the police department, and he gets up on the roof. And we all know that he's going to jump off the roof, right? He's going to fly. This is what Batman does. And instead of, like, I liked the Nolan version where he had like the electric cape that made everything rigid. I love the fact that this was just a wingsuit and he like zips it up and you get this close up on his face. And you can see in Robert Pattinson's acting how scared Batman is. Like, he does not know if this is going to work. And then he jumps off of the building and we intercut between shots of his face while he's falling and and you can see it in the facial, especially in his eyes. And then we cut to like his point of view when the camera is like falling down the building and just that shallow depth of field where we're only focusing on Batman's face and we're seeing how much this terrifies him and how uncertain he is if this is going to work. That to me was just brilliant filmmaking. Like, I loved that scene.
Yes, but the part where he's running was really bad. I just didn't. I thought he looked so dumb running, and I don't know what it is.
Most people do.
I know, and I get that.
Except for on Baywatch, nobody looks good running.
I get that, but like for whatever reason, it just looked bad to me.
He was a clunky Batman in his movement.
Yeah.
But to me, that makes more sense because, again, like you said, he's super new at this.
Yeah.
His costume it is very clunky. But I love it. I do love that with his cowl and his mask, they show his profile at least 6 times during this movie, and he looks exactly like animated Batman with that like cut. I thought, okay, that was super smart because like you're trying to give us the feel of the Batman that you want us to feel. And I thought that was really neat because every time they showed it, I was like, okay, this is the 6th time, but I'm all for it. Like, you can do it another time if you want to. But I just thought it was super smart. Let's get back to the villains for a minute. Like, the villains' backstories were super believable. I loved that Catwoman's dad, it is the reason that she is. Like, he is the mob boss. He is the reason why this place is going to shit, right? Sorry, that's our one swear word. And
It's out there now. I can't take it back. We're live,
so like, she is just as violent as her dad, but she thinks it's okay because she's protecting the people that she loves.
Right.
And
which
he's
is what her
pulling all
dad also thinks, by the
Yeah,
way.
exactly. But it's also what Batman thinks, and it's also, I mean,
Mhm.
like, everyone thinks this. And then you get Penguin, who Colin Farrell, I mean, put your hands together for him. He's in 2 movies that came out this last weekend. One was a Sundance Festival movie that was also at Cannes, and a couple of other ones where it's totally different characters altogether. And then you have him as the Penguin, which is the most believable Penguin I have ever seen. Some people are making fun of, like, he kind of looks like the guy from, like, Dan Aykroyd in
In The Burbs, or
not The Burbs.
no,
It's now I have that in my head, but
it's
where they all get arrested in the small town and they have to
yeah.
go, and he's
The
like
guy
the
who eats the white
judge.
sausage that's really gross
Yeah.
looking. Yeah.
Like, he kinda looks like him, and then a couple
Yeah.
other people. No, I thought, like, it was totally believable, and it makes sense that he would be the next upcoming person as this guy goes down, because a person like Penguin doesn't start off as the guy in charge. Like, that's never been who Penguin is to me, that character. So this is so believable, and I love, like, every time he's on screen, he's like the silent screen stealer. He doesn't have to do anything big and crazy to get your attention. You're just drawn in. And he's not trying to be big and attention getting, right? He's just he's kind of a regular guy that just was in the right place at the right time, that's taking over. I love when they leave him in the middle of nowhere.
And he's got a waddle because he's all chained up. It was perfect.
The thing that was really cool too is Matt Reeves had talked to Colin Farrell about doing the role, and he had just done a movie where he was bigger in the role. He put on some weight, and so that's what Matt Reeves was envisioning. And then Colin Farrell was like, you know what? I got to lose this weight. I don't feel healthy. And so he was like, well, crap, that now I got to rethink the character. And the makeup artist said, no, I can do this. And he was like, I don't know. And he's like, no, let me give this a shot. And it took him, at the start of the filming, it took him 4 hours in the chair to achieve that look. They got it down to 2 towards the end, but 4 hours of makeup. And he walked on set and people did not recognize him. They didn't know who he was. They're like, are you supposed to be here? And it really threw him off. And then this was the other part that I found so funny. They were filming during COVID, and props to them for pulling this off during the height of COVID. I mean, they were filming at this time last year, and the world was going nuts. And he said that because Colin Farrell would go and get makeup early and then they would shoot all day, he never saw Colin Farrell outside of the makeup. So he's like, I don't feel like I worked with Colin. I worked with Cobblepot. I worked with Oswald. I didn't work with Colin, because he was just so different in that role. And he just disappears in that role. But man, he's got some memorable lines.
Well, and I'm a huge fan of John Turturro, and this is one of my favorite things. Like I love him in Rounders. I know that's weird because it's not like a critically acclaimed movie, but his character in Rounders is one of my favorite characters. But then him in this, like, as the main bad guy, that's not usually who
No,
he
that's not usually.
He's
and
usually
he does great. And then Peter Sarsgaard, like, what a creepy creeperton, like, so great, and just, like, pleading for his life, and, like, just so, like, he was so, needy. He was needy and pathetic and scuzzy, and then Andy Serkis, this might be, like, this kind of character for Andy Serkis is why I love him. Yeah, he does so many amazing, crazy things, but the fact that he can come on screen and play this straight character, like he is being, you know, this caretaker of this person. And it's not a character because he usually plays characters. And he did it beautifully, and I believed it. I believed that he cared so much about this family. I believe that he cared so much about Bruce Wayne. I think because I mean, that character is one of my favorites in Batman in general, right? And they've always had a special place in my heart. Even like Morgan Freeman's, I thought was a really different take on it, and I really loved it. But this one, to me, I felt like they had this connection. Morgan Freeman?
No, he was Lucius Fox.
Oh, he was Lucius Fox. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
his name was Val.
oh yeah. I just felt like they really had a connection unlike I've seen any of them have before
Well, it was an
together.
interesting relationship that they had because typically Alfred is his right-hand man, and he is in this. It's not that he's not, but like
But they're not
there's
partners in this.
yeah, like in this, they're almost fighting the whole time. Like they're
There's
barely
Like
talking to
family.
each other.
Like
Yeah,
family.
yeah. And there's a lot of resentment there between Bruce and Alfred, and you see it, and there's a lot of tension there until the explosion, and
Right.
then in the hospital and everything, they kinda clear it up. So I'm excited to see where these 2 characters go in the next film, as I think we're going to see Bruce trying to do more as Bruce Wayne and how that gets in the way of being Batman, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Matt
Yeah.
Reeves is gonna be writing it, I'm sure, and hopefully
He
directing it,
is.
and I'm sure he's got an idea of where the story's gonna go, and he's much smarter than I am as far as that goes, so I'm gonna let him figure it out, but I'm excited to see where it goes. And
Yeah,
if we're
he
gonna
did.
talk oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna take it someplace else, so if you've got
Okay,
I
real quick.
don't wanna
The thing that he said is no matter what in the sequel, he has to find a way to challenge Batman in new and exciting ways. He does not want to tread the same path that either he's done in this movie. He doesn't want to do what other directors have done with this character. He wants to find new villains and new ways to basically torture Batman because Batman is a tortured character. He's not a happy guy, even
That's
on his best
true.
days.
Um, we haven't talked about him yet, but Jeffrey Wright as
Oh.
Gordon was amazing, and,
Mhm.
like, I'm a big Gary Oldman fan, and I loved his Commissioner Gordon, um, in the Christopher Nolan series, but I may have liked Jeffrey Wright a little bit more. He was just kinda like, he's what you picture this kind of character being, like, he is just a no-nonsense cop who's just really good to the core, right? He's honest, he's got integrity compared to a lot of the people on the force, but he also, like, there's no nonsense, like, you don't mess around with him.
Right.
Like, you
And
believe that he will take you out if you do, you know?
I didn't get the
I love the
feeling in the
part when he was
Nolan
like
films that they were really partners.
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, Val.
I love it when you're fine. I love it when he was like, "Punch me." And then
Yes.
afterwards, he's like, "I thought you were gonna, like, pull the punch a little," and he's like, I mean, I did."
I did.
I did.
You're not dead, right? So
Your jaw still works? Yeah, you're okay.
But, yeah, their interaction, like, as they're going on the sting to, like, get Penguin and, you know,
Mhm.
that leads to the car chase and everything, like, they are working together and partners, and you can tell that that relationship is really building, and that's gonna be another exciting thing to see how that grows and develops and what kind of tension, because that's the thing is
Mhm.
you build up a character in a relationship like that, and then you can put in tension where now they're gonna be at odds at some point, right? And
Right.
how do they deal with that, and how do they
Well, and
resolve that?
as Gordon moves up to become commissioner, there's gonna be more
Mhm.
pressure on him to limit things that he was able to get away with as a lieutenant.
Yeah. Although when his old partner, the current commissioner died, Like, was anybody surprised that he was a dirty cop? Because he
Yeah.
just I got, like I felt dirty just looking at him. Like, he seemed gross.
What
And
I
he was
Oh,
supposed
loved
to.
yeah, and
Right.
what I loved about this is that in all the other Batman movies that we've seen, you know that it's corrupt because they keep telling you that the system is corrupt, but they don't really show you the
Mhm,
numbers, and it makes so much more sense because especially if there's a documentary on Netflix about the police departments in New York in the 80s in the or the late 70s and how corrupt like police were at that time, and it makes so much sense when you're living in a time where you have these people like Penguin and everybody running the streets, um, that you would have officers corrupt. And I've seen like all these documentaries lately about this, but I love how they also show that half of them aren't. Half of them are there, you
mhm,
know, when he thinks he has everyone in his pocket, right?
mhm.
And then he walks out
Mhm.
and it's like all the people that you didn't know weren't taking your money because when you're that powerful, you just think everyone is with you and
Yep.
Everybody.
they're not. And the
Mhm.
fact that it was
Mhm.
so split, but that there was so much dirty going on. And I thought that was a really good kind of social justice moment as well that you don't think as much about. But in the past couple of years, we've been arguing with each other
Mhm.
online about
Mhm.
what's going on
Mhm.
in the police department and what's not. And so I love how they showed that there's both is happening. There's 2 different sides in
Yep.
a city. There's the good and the bad, and, you know, the good kinda is gonna come out in the end, you know, I really liked that because I thought that was a little controversial as well, and he could have just gone all the way bad with it except for a few, you know, police officers and then, of course, detective, you know, so
Yeah.
Right. So, who do you guys wanna see in the next movie? Like, I think we're definitely gonna get Penguin again,
Mhm.
but
yeah, I
I'm okay if they don't bring in Joker, but I'm wondering if there's a specific villain you'd like to see.
I mean, I kinda wanna see them like develop who they gave us. You know, we got a
Mhm.
taste of all of these worlds and it wasn't for once, it wasn't too much, right? And so I really want to get to know these people a little bit better and I think that's where Marvel has done a really good job is that they introduced us to these characters and then they fed us a little bit more and got us a little more hooked and brought in like a someone who's going to be bigger later. So I'm
Mhm.
just kind of excited to see what he does with it. I don't want to have any expectations, but I want to know where Catwoman is going. You know, they both
Yeah.
turned 2 different ways, but you know that that path is gonna come back around because it always does, you know, and I
I
wanna see these relationships grow.
I just got excited because she was going to Bloodhaven, and that made me happy
Yes!
because that's where Nightwing hangs out is Bloodhaven, and we're not gonna get Nightwing because that he's
No,
tied in with Batman, but, um, it was exciting.
but
Um,
that was nice.
Even though the motorcycle driving scene was also kind of cheesy, but that's fine. I'm not gonna nitpick because
Yeah.
I enjoyed the movie overall, and I know a lot of people really did, and I don't wanna.
With the Twilight music.
Yeah.
There was a couple of moments where I felt like we were going to Forks.
Yeah.
Like, I love the music and the score was good,
The music
but
was
if you've
amazing.
watched Twilight, and I'm not saying this is bad, kids, but if you've watched Twilight, there are very distinct score choices in that movie, and there were 2
Mhm.
times in this movie I felt like I was going to Forks, and if they did it on purpose, they're smart because the Twilight fans are out in droves on the internet telling people to go support Battinson at the theater, which I love. I love.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, um, this is I don't have expectations. I've seen online people suggesting, the Court of Owls, which was a storyline
That
that's been
could be
recently.
really good.
Scott Snyder did it with, on his run with Batman, and it would be really great. I think it fits in this world really, really well.
Mhm.
Um, but I almost feel like that might be a 3rd movie more than the 2nd movie. I think we need one
Right.
more building Batman up a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, However, what I would, and so I don't necessarily have a preference on what villain we bring in. I don't want to see Raj Al Ghul because we don't need that right now.
Right. Right.
Um, I don't, and I wouldn't mind pushing Joker off a little bit as well.
I agree.
But what I really want to see, I know that Penguin will be back, but I don't ever want to see him as the main bad. I want him to
Yes.
constantly be kind of this side character that
Mhm.
exists in this world, who's always flirting with the line of, doing just enough to know that he's a bad guy, but they're not going to bring him in because they've got bigger fish to fry at the time. And that's what I would like to see. Yeah, that one was bad. But that's what I'd like to see from Penguin, because I think
Mhm.
Colin Farrell's Penguin has the potential to be that kind of a character that when they need to, they can lean on him and have another scene where they've got him up against the wall and, you know, things like that, like we saw in this movie. I just want to continue to see him in that role. Don't
Mhm.
elevate him to the main villain. And I think I'd be happy with that. And I'd like to see more villains like that, where they're kind of just, they're there. Like, everybody knows Penguin owns the iceberg in the comics, and everybody,
Right.
that's where he knows to go find him and things like that. Just keep that and don't make him the main bad guy, and I would be happy with that.
I
So,
agree completely. Yeah. I'm with you. I don't necessarily want to see a Joker, but if I'm on board with whatever Matt Reeves wants to do at this point.
mhm,
He killed it with the last two Planet of the Apes movies. Now he's got the Batman, and I think DC has finally figured this out, in that they aren't going to worry about being Marvel, which is fantastic, because there's room enough for different interpretations, and not everything in this. We're not going to have this connected universe where every movie ties into every other movie and every little bit leads into this next thing. And they said today they are going to allow more directors to have fun in their sandbox with these characters and create their own visions, which
mhm.
I think is great. You've got James Wan doing Aquaman. He's doing Aquaman 2 right now. Patty Jenkins with Wonder Woman. The first one was great. The second one, not so much. But still, Shazam. So you've got these, and now we've got Black Adam coming out. We've
Mhm.
got the
The
Flash. So
Flash.
I really like the fact that we can just have these stories. And this to me felt like, yes, it's part of a bigger series, and yes, it's going to become a probably a trilogy. But it didn't feel like it was setting up the next movie. It was just, this was a really, really, really good standalone film.
Yeah. This was Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I liked about the Christopher Nolan Batman movies is it wasn't trying to connect to a larger universe. It was just its
Right.
self-contained thing. They've got a little bit of a mess to clean up now as a
Yes.
result of what they have done, and they're still keeping Ezra Miller and Jason
Momoa.
Momoa as their characters, and they've got to decide how that fits in. And I think we're going to see some of that with Flashpoint,
Mhm.
um, with the Flash movie, and how they're gonna clean that up. But I agree, I would like for them to keep doing what they're doing, and not try to connect
And
everything
and
together.
and then you've got something like Peacemaker, which is completely different than anything else that they're doing, which I loved. I thought that was a great series.
You'll be shocked, I don't know a whole lot about Peacemaker or the series.
John Cena, a lot of explosions and a lot of F bombs.
Okay, so that much I knew, but
And a really awesome eagle.
Oh, Eagly
Named
is
Eagly.
best opening sequence of all
Is
time,
it?
probably.
Or is it good one
Oh,
time?
it's so great. No,
I
like every time it came on, I'm like, they're like the little option to skip it, and I'm like, nope.
Yeah, Dave's like, "Ah, ta, 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 ta," and I'm like, "Again?"
so I have heard so many good things about the opening sequence that I've almost been tempted to just
Just go watch the
watch
opening
the opening
That's
sequence,
sequence.
that.
yeah. It's
Oh,
worth
yeah,
seeing at
it's
least
totally fine.
once.
Yeah, and I know there was some major appearance by somebody or something in the finale, but I don't know.
I haven't watched all of it. I've
So,
only
Yeah,
watched 3
the
episodes.
Flash and Aquaman show up at the very end.
okay. Yeah,
So,
see,
it
so we're still
but
this is the problem with DC, is they're saying one thing, but they're still doing the other thing, and
right.
that's what they've
I
gotta
mean,
figure
let
it
them
out.
do what they wanna do. Like, just let it
But I
happen.
but I like
You can't
that
do
I
anything
like the
about
fact
it.
that we're gonna
Well, no, obviously I can't. They They don't take my calls. Trust me, I've tried.
But I like the fact we're going to get different directors with different styles and
Yes.
different feel, and every movie is going to feel different, which I am excited about. I think that that's going to keep the superhero genre interesting and fresh, as opposed to just kind of feeling stale.
Yeah.
I love Marvel. I have loved what Marvel has done, but the last couple of movies, I haven't gotten super excited. It's like we've kind of seen this before. So I now I know there's different ones coming out, Doctor Strange and some stuff, but like I
Well,
really
and
didn't like the Eternals. Shang-Chi was okay.
but there have been some though that have come out. I wasn't a big fan of Shang-Chi, and the Eternals was just okay. Both of them
Mhm.
weren't bad. They were just
They
fine.
weren't bad, but
But I think the ones that stand out to me that are really good are where the directors have a really strong perspective and the way they're telling the story, like Captain America and the Winter Soldier, where the first one that the Russo brothers directed was
Mhm.
so good. And then Avengers, Infinity War and Endgame were both really good. And Taika Waititi and Thor Ragnarok is one of my favorite movies. And so I'm excited to see what he does with Love and Thunder. So I
Mhm.
agree, like when you can get strong directors in there and let them tell their story the way that they
Surprised
want
me.
to, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So, um,
Should
we
we
s
grade this thing?
yeah, we need to give this a grade. Tracy, let's start with you since Batman is your favorite.
So I went into this movie with limited expectations. Like I liked the trailers, but it wasn't nothing in them grabbed me and said I need to see this. But I'm like, I'm going to go see it opening night because it's Batman and I'm a fan. But there wasn't anything where I was like super geeked about seeing. And I like the fact that so much of the marketing material did not give away the film. There are so many twists and turns in this movie um, that I really enjoyed. The whole um, reason that the Riddler's doing this and how it all fits together. The cinematography was phenomenal. Some of my favorite. I think this might be the best version of the Batman that we've had. There have been others that were better at Bruce Wayne and some other things, but this to me just fit really, really well. I'm giving this one a solid A. I can't wait to see it in the theater again. Um, I went in expecting to probably give this a B minus, and I came out a solid A.
Val,
B plus for me.
okay? That's all you're getting on that. We're not giving you any more, just a B plus.
Well, I feel like I've given you all my opinions. I don't know. My only other opinion is you guys didn't bring up Spider-Man. The last Spider-Man movie was brilliant, and I think it should have been nominated for an Academy Award, and we're going to
Yes.
talk about that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all I have left to say. B plus. B
Okay.
plus.
I would give this a B plus as well. So I went in similar to Tracy. I didn't know what to expect. DC's been such a mixed bag lately that like you kind of just have to go in with no expectations. And but I had heard people say, "Oh, this is the greatest ever," and whatever. I don't think that this is better than The Dark Knight. I think The Dark Knight is slightly better in my opinion. I do think this one had some pacing issues at parts, and I know we talked about this before we went on the air, where you asked what would you cut out. I don't know. It's felt really long.
It was
Yeah.
long.
And I felt like
It's long, but to me it fit.
and that's great. And I'm glad that you gave it an A, Tracy. I think it's really great. I think the music is fantastic. Um, so it's a solid B plus for me, which is really like
It's really good.
still really
A B
good.
plus is
So
really good. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
the
And I
music's
like that.
fantastic though. I can't say enough about the music.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah. And Val, we had talked about a little bit offline about how everybody has their own version of Batman that is their
mhm,
Batman. And if this isn't necessarily your Batman, that's okay.
yeah,
But I like the fact that this is a character who's been around for 80 years, and I felt like it was a fresh look at this character. It was a fresh take, which is exciting.
Which is at the same time, like, it's a fresh take for me and for a
mhm,
lot of people, which I think is smart, but then I also love that for you guys that, read the comics, that you're getting to see things on screen that you have seen in comic books and in video games for so long. So it's not new for you, but it feels new enough. And then, of course, it's super new to people like
seen that on the
me.
big screen.
Yeah, and so I love that it's new, but at the same time, like, it's not. You know what I mean? Like, it still is bringing things back from its original medium,
Mhm.
to make you excited. So I think that's really neat.
And I think more excited than the film, I'm more excited for what it's setting up because I like
Mhm.
this world that Matt Reeves has created, and I'm
Mhm.
excited to see where it goes because of a lot of those reasons. So I think this is a really good solid start, and I'm excited to see where he takes it from here. So there you go. If you've seen The Batman, tell us what you thought about it. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. You can do that just under this post. Just post your comments right there, or you can send us an email at podcast@moviesthatmakeus.com. And this month, we've got some things coming up. We are going to do an Oscars episode, and we'll talk about some of the nominees for Best Picture and maybe even give you some predictions. Who knows? Like, we don't plan these things out in advance, except kind of what the topic's going to be. So just be prepared for anything. And we just appreciate your support and thanks for watching. And until next time, we won't see you at the movies. Are you going to
You're not
sing
gonna
for us?
sing Prince? Are you gonna sing Prince? What's happening?
No, 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 Batman!
All right.
This has been a Stolen Droids Media production.